There's a very interesting place in Hollow Knight called the Spirit's Glade, which is largely ignored due to being mostly backer content, but I think that it's a lot more interesting than people give it credit for. So let's start by defining exactly what it is. According to Google, glade is an open space in a forest. I don't know how to tell Team Cherry this, but I'm not getting lush forest or gentle meadow kind of vibes from this place. Like they really nailed it on the head with Green Path, but this one just doesn't seem to fit at all. Between the husk things lining the walls, the ghosts inhabiting the area, and Revek at the entrance threatening to literally kill you, I'd go as far as to say this place is even a bit uninviting. But what caused the glade to be this way? Why was it sealed off? And why was it taboo for the Moth tribe to open it? To explain that, we're going to need a bit of background, so if you don't want any spoilers, here's your warning. Okay, before Hallownest was united under the Pale King, there was this group who worshipped the Radiants known as the Moth tribe, but when the Pale King arrived in Hallownest, they diverted their attention away from the Radiants and toward the Pale King, leaving the Radiants to be nearly forgotten, only kept alive by whispers of faith. While Hollow Knight has a metric ton of lore, we actually don't know very much about this Moth tribe as a whole and their connections to the Radiants. But this history lies in the Spirit's Glade. First, we have to establish that the Spirit's Glade was from before the Pale King arrived in Hallownest. There are two major pieces of evidence for this, the first of which being that it is unlikely that the Pale King is very related to the Dream Realm. If he was able to enter dreams, or had any control over this realm, there would be no reason for him not to duke it out with the Radiants Godzilla vs. Mothra style to save his kingdom. I think that it's likely that during the time the Moths were drawn to the Pale King, they were drawn away from the Radiants, and thus the Dream Realm. The second reason for this is because the glade was closed off and is taboo to enter, in a similar vein to how the Radiants became taboo to speak of when the tribe started following the Pale King's light. We know for certain that the Spirit's Glade was closed off after the tribe had begun following the Pale King, because a king's idol can be found within the area. In these ways, it's pretty evident that the Spirit's Glade is related to both the Radiants and the Moth tribe in its prime, aka when the whole tribe wasn't dead. Similarly, it would also explain the dreary atmosphere of the glade, since it has likely been neglected for a long time, though just how long exactly isn't known. This begs the question, if the Spirit's Glade was primarily used before the Pale King arrived at Hallownest, then where did the spirits within the glade come from? It seems unlikely that they are just from Hallownest before the kingdom was created, as all of the spirits within the glade seem to be capable of higher thought, something that the Pale King brought to Hallownest. So these bugs must have come from a different source. An argument could be made that these bugs might be from the ancient civilization, but I see this as fairly unlikely compared to the alternative I'll present. The only piece of evidence for this case would be if you believed that the markings under Karina's eyes were from Void, but even this, I think, falls victim to the fallacy of instantly assuming that everything that is black is Void. My theory is that many of these spirits come from the lands outside of Hallownest. From what little we know of Silksong, we know that outside of Hallownest there are beings who are capable of higher thought, so this isn't a stretch, but would still need some more evidence to be considered a viable theory. The most blatant flaw in this idea would be that most of the spirits that we see in-game, such as the Warrior Dreams, are above their corpses or near where they died. So why would all of these souls be gathered here if they died outside of Hallownest? This question can be answered by looking at the Shrine of the Believers within the glade. It's likely that it was only through the power of the Radiants that the Moth tribe was able to communicate with people from a different universe. So is it really that much of a stretch to say that the Radiants would be able to bring about a dozen or so souls from other lands to this glade? I don't really think so. Bearing this in mind, let's look at a few of the characters we know are from beyond Hallownest within the game and compare them to the spirits in the glade. Starting off with Cornifer, if you look at his design compared to Grohax, it's pretty clear that they look very similar, and it's likely that they're even of the same species. If this is true, it would almost certainly imply the Grohack is from beyond Hallownest, just as Cornifer is. More similarities in design can be seen between Iselda and Wyatt, as well as Cloth and Atra, though it's hard to say what Cloth really looks like because of the whole paper bag covering his face. I will concede that these two are a bit more of a stretch than Cornifer and Grohack, but even if you do deny the fact that these three pairs look very similar to one another, it's fairly evident that for the most part, these creatures don't look like any of the other bugs that inhabit Hallownest. I would also like to talk about two more inhabitants of the Spirit's Glade that further support this theory, Garo and Boss. Garo's dialogue reads, "A true warrior is one who can stand strong in the midst of a storm." What storms are there in Hallownest? There's a little bit of drizzle in the City of Tears and a bit of wind at the edge of the Howling Cliffs, but nothing that I would consider to be a big storm. Heck, Hallownest hardly even has weather, period. When speaking to Boss in the Glade, he says that he traveled far to reach this place, which I think can be interpreted two different ways. You could believe that he traveled to Hallownest, died there, and was buried in the Spirit's Glade for some reason, or you can believe that he died in his homeland and was brought to the Spirit's Glade by some drawing force like the Radiants. I believe the latter to be true, since there wouldn't be too much of a reason to come to Hallownest since this glade was maintained before the Pale King established his kingdom. The question still lies, however, why would these souls be brought here? They all seem quite different, and there isn't a ton in common between them. Dreamnail and the Whispering Root in the Glade prompts the following dialogue: "Sacred memories, honored souls." I don't really know about you guys, but I don't think that Millibug selling cookies really should have qualified her to get a free pass into heaven, but that may just be me. Now, this is the part of the video where things get a bit more dicey, but I think I found a reasonable enough explanation for why most of these bugs are here, and that is to find peace. While I don't want to go into every bug in the Glade, since that would make things way more boring than they need to be, I'll talk about a few that exhibit this. Millibug was either killed or died selling cookies and is trying to make peace with the fact that she won't ever be able to return back home. Caspian seems to have committed some messed up stuff in his life, but found peace within the Glade. And most of the warriors in the Glade are trying to come to terms with their own death. So at this point of the video, you might be thinking, well, wasn't this whole Glade just based on a Kickstarter backer award? Does there really need to be any meaning behind this beside it being a cool little homage? And to that I would respond that characters like Cloth and Tiso, while perhaps not incredibly important to the story, still fit into Hollow Knight despite being backer content. The beauty of Hollow Knight is that the world doesn't revolve around the player. It's a fully fleshed out world with developed characters that don't rely on the player to exist. Characters in this game may not be important to the overall story, but still have little quirks that make them interesting, and that's what makes this game such an immersive experience. The stories these spirits tell may not mean much, but they make the game all the more better by just being included.